Hi, I'm Hakim, and it's my great pleasure to introduce the latest edition of this book, which has just been published. I'm a historian. I think I first started writing for Hachette in 1994, and I've written several books, one of which, called African Migrations, will be republished next year. That's a history of Africa and Africans, not just in the African continent, but why there are people of African heritage all over the world. This particular book, The History of African and Caribbean Communities in Britain, was first published in 1995. So this is an updated and slightly changed edition. We've added some new photos and some other details were a little bit different. I think the idea for the book came about because I was writing other things about this history for adults, but there was nothing for young people, nothing that explained this history for young people 25 years ago, and there's not really anything very much today either. So it was very important that young people had a book which presented a history which wasn't being presented anywhere else. And I know that when I was at school, it was one of the things that I really missed, was having a history of African and Caribbean people in Britain. So that's where the idea came from originally. And I'm very pleased to say that Hachette published it first in 2005. The 2005 edition looked something like that. That was the first edition. Sorry, 1995 edition looked like that. Then, 10 years later, another edition came out. It looked something like this. And then, 5 years ago, we had that edition. Looks very similar to the present one, but I can assure you that this has been updated, some new photos and so on. So it's great that the book is still around after 25 years. Still very important that we have this history, because often when young people are at school, they learn a history which doesn't include much about African people or Caribbean people, or perhaps only presents things not in a very exciting way, or not in a very positive way. So hopefully this book can fill a gap which unfortunately is still around. It tells the history over the last 2,000 years, something like that, from Roman times up until the present day. And although it's not a history just of individual figures, it does include some important individual figures. People like Septimus Severus, who was a Roman emperor who died in Britain but was born in Libya in North Africa. People like Alaudo Equiano, who was an African in Britain in the 18th century, who campaigned for the rights of Africans and the rights of working people in Britain. People like Mary Seacole, who was a famous Jamaican nurse in the 19th century. And also some key figures from the 20th century. But as I say, it's not just a book about individuals, it's a book about communities and the history of people of African and Caribbean heritage in this country. Who is my favourite figure in the book? That's very difficult to say because there's so many. I guess one of them would be this gentleman who was not born in Britain. Was actually born in the US, so you can see him there. That's him in the 1950s playing Othello, the title character in the famous play by Shakespeare. His name was Paul Robeson. He was an African-American actor, singer, and a political activist and campaigner who was persecuted for his politics, for his political beliefs. And he's one of those people who I suppose, inspired me, or who I find an inspiring figure, because he was very famous at the height of his career when he was being persecuted for what he believed by the US government. But he refused to succumb to that pressure. He took a stand, and he stuck to the stand that he took, which was his political beliefs, his concern for the rights of Africans, people of African heritage throughout the world, including in the US. So he took that stand against racism, against colonialism, and he refused to back down, even though it cost him, it hurt his career. His passport was confiscated. He couldn't leave the country. He couldn't give concerts, so on and so forth. But he stuck to his gun, stuck to his beliefs. So he's a very important figure. People forget about him a little bit today, but he was extremely famous in his day, and famous in Britain. He spent a lot of his time in Britain, where he was voted the most popular performer during the 1930s in film, as a concert singer, an actor. So if you've never heard of Paul Robeson, you should have a look in the book, find out more about him. A very interesting and very important figure. So that's all I think I've got time to say. And he's just one of the interesting characters in this book, which I hope everybody will find interesting, useful. Although it's designed for young people, adults also like reading it and find it useful. So I hope that all of you will find it interesting and will want to read it and buy it for younger members of your families and so on. Thanks for listening.